It all started when I was just 9 years old. My mom Sarah married Michael Brooks. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I was living with my dad in California, and Michael was just some guy my mom had chosen to spend her life with in Texas. My dad, Jack Thompson, was my entire world. He made me laugh when I was sad, taught me to ride a bike, and always knew exactly what to say when things went wrong. Every Sunday morning, we had our special pancake tradition. He'd let me flip them even though I always messed it up, creating misshapen blobs that looked nothing like circles. But he'd just laugh and say, "Emma, those are the most creative pancakes I've ever seen." We'd sit at our small kitchen table, drowning our pancakes in maple syrup, and he'd tell me stories about when he was my age. Sometimes, when I couldn't sleep, he'd sit on the edge of my bed and read The Velveteen Rabbit. I must have heard that story 100 times, but I never got tired of it. Dad would do all the different voices, making the old toy horse sound grumpy and the rabbit sound hopeful and scared. I'd always beg for just one more chapter, and he'd usually give in, saying, "Okay, but this is really the last one." Life wasn't perfect, but it felt pretty close. Sure, I missed Mom sometimes, but we talked on the phone every week. She'd tell me about her new life in Texas, about her job at the hospital, and sometimes about Michael. I'd listen politely, but none of it felt real to me. Texas might as well have been another planet. My world was right there in California, with my dad, my friends, and our little house with the creaky front porch. I had my best friend Katie next door, and we'd spend hours making up dance routines in her backyard. Our elementary school was just 3 blocks away, and Dad would walk me there every morning. He never forgot to give me a hug before I went inside, even though I started saying I was too old for hugs in public. Looking back now, I wish I'd hugged him more. I wish I'd paid more attention to the little things. Like how he'd leave silly notes in my lunchbox, or the way he'd sing off key while doing the dishes. But when you're 9, you think everything good in your life will last forever. You don't expect the ground to disappear beneath your feet. You don't expect to wake up one morning and have your entire world change. But that's exactly what happened when I turned 12. It was just a normal Tuesday. Dad had promised to take me to the mall after school to pick out new sneakers. My old ones had holes in them, and I'd been begging for those sparkly ones all the other girls were wearing. I remember sitting in class, watching the clock, excited about our shopping trip. But when the final bell rang, it wasn't Dad waiting outside. It was our neighbor, Mrs. Martinez, and she had this look on her face I'll never forget. She tried to smile, but her eyes were red and puffy. "Emma, sweetie," she said. Reaching for my hand. "We need to go to the hospital." Everything after that becomes a blur in my memory. I remember fragments, like pieces of a broken mirror. The sterile smell of the hospital corridors. The sound of doctors talking in low, serious voices. Words like car accident and didn't make it floating around me. But none of it felt real. I kept waiting to wake up from what had to be a nightmare. I sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, still wearing my backpack, still holding on to the hope that Dad would walk through the doors any minute. He'd laugh and say it was all a big misunderstanding. We'd still go get those sneakers. Everything would be fine. But he didn't walk through those doors. Instead, my mom arrived 6 hours later, her face streaked with tears. She pulled me into a hug that felt foreign and familiar all at once. "Oh, baby," she whispered into my hair. "I'm so sorry." The next few days passed in a haze. People kept bringing casseroles and saying how sorry they were. Our house filled with relatives I barely knew and friends trying their best to help. I heard them talking when they thought I couldn't hear. About arrangements that needed to be made. About what would happen to me now. About how lucky I was to have my mom and Michael to take me in. Lucky wasn't the word I would have chosen. The funeral was on a Sunday. It seemed wrong to have it on Pancake Day. I wore a black dress that Katie's mom had bought for me because I didn't own anything appropriate. The fabric itched, and I couldn't stop fidgeting with the collar. I didn't cry during the service. I just sat there, between Mom and Katie, feeling like I was watching everything happen to someone else. People kept talking about what a good man my dad was. How he'd light up any room he walked into. How he loved being a father more than anything else in the world. I wanted to scream at them to stop talking about him in the past tense. To stop acting like he was gone when he couldn't be gone. He was supposed to be here. He was supposed to see me graduate. To teach me how to drive. To embarrass me at my first school dance. To be my dad. But instead, I was packing up my room a week later. Mom said I could only take what would fit in 2 suitcases because we'd be flying to Texas. How do you pack up your entire life into 2 suitcases? How do you choose which memories to take and which to leave behind? I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by everything I owned, trying to make impossible decisions. Katie came over to help, but we both ended up crying instead. She made me promise to text her every day. To never forget our secret handshake. To come back and visit someday. I promised everything she asked, even though something inside me knew things would never be the same. The night before we left, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through our house, touching everything, trying to memorize it all. The chip in the kitchen. Counter where Dad had dropped a frozen turkey that one Thanksgiving. The height marks on the doorframe showing how much I'd grown. The squeaky third step on the stairs that we always skipped over. I ended up in Dad's room, sitting on his bed. His clothes still hung in the closet. His watch still sat on the nightstand. Everything looked exactly the same, except nothing would ever be the same again. I grabbed one of his flannel shirts and buried my face in it. It still smelled like him, like coffee in the woodshop where he worked. I stuffed it into my suitcase, not caring that it took up too much space. The flight to Texas felt like traveling to another dimension. Mom held my hand during takeoff, just like she used to when I was little. But her hand felt different now. Or maybe I was the one who was different. Michael was waiting for us at the airport in Dallas. He stood there with a "Welcome Home Emma" sign, like this was something to celebrate. Like I was starting an adventure instead of leaving my whole life behind. He tried to hug me, but I stepped back. He didn't seem offended, just smiled and grabbed my suitcases. "You must be exhausted," he said. "Let's get you home." But it wasn't home. It was a house in a small town I'd never heard of, with streets I didn't know and people who were strangers to me. The house was nice enough, bigger than our place in California. I had my own room with a bay window and pale blue walls. Michael had even bought me a new bedspread with butterflies on it. Mom showed me around like a real estate agent, pointing out all the features she thought would impress me. "Look, Emma, you have your own bathroom. The closet is huge, plenty of room for all your things. And wait until you see the backyard." I nodded and smiled when I was supposed to, but all I could think about was my old room. The glow-in-the-dark stars Dad had helped me stick on the ceiling. The window that looked out at Katie's house. The familiar creaks and shadows I knew by heart. That first night, I lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this new house. The air conditioning hummed differently. The shadows on the walls were wrong. Even the air smelled different, heavy with humidity instead of the salty breeze I was used to. I pulled Dad's flannel shirt out of my suitcase and wrapped it around my pillow. Then I finally let myself cry. Not the quiet tears from the funeral, but deep, gasping sobs that felt like they were being torn from somewhere deep inside me. I must have fallen asleep eventually because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the unfamiliar window. For a moment, I forgot where I was. I expected to hear Dad downstairs, making coffee and humming off-key. Instead, I heard Mom and Michael's voices, muffled but cheerful, floating up from the kitchen. I stayed in bed as long as I could, pretending I was somewhere else. But eventually, Mom called up the stairs. "Emma, breakfast is ready." I dragged myself down to the kitchen, still wearing Dad's shirt over my pajamas. Michael was at the stove, flipping pancakes. They were perfect circles, golden brown and uniform. Nothing like the misshapen ones Dad and I used to make. "I heard these were your favorite," Michael said, sliding a plate in front of me. I stared at the pancakes, feeling sick to my stomach. "I'm not hungry," I mumbled, pushing the plate away. Mom gave me that worried look I was starting to hate. "Sweetie, you need to eat something." I said I'm not hungry. I didn't mean to shout, but the words came out loud and sharp. The kitchen went quiet. Michael turned back to the stove, pretending to be very interested in the pancakes. Mom sighed and started talking about getting me registered for school. I tuned her out, watching syrup slowly drip off the edge of my untouched pancakes. That was the beginning of my new life in Texas. A life where everything looked perfect on the surface but felt wrong underneath. Like those pancakes, they were technically perfect, but they weren't right. Nothing was right anymore. And I didn't know then, but things were about to get so much worse. School started a week after we moved. I walked into Riverside Middle School wearing new clothes Mom had bought me, trying to look like I belonged. But I might as well have had "new girl" tattooed on my forehead. Everyone stared as I walked down the hallway, whispers following me like shadows. In California, I'd been popular, confident, always surrounded by friends. Here, I felt like an alien who'd landed in the wrong world. The teachers all gave me that same sympathetic look when they called my name. Word had gotten around about my dad, about why I'd moved here. I hated their pity more than the whispers. Mom went back to work at the hospital, pulling long shifts in the ER. She'd leave before I woke up and come home after I was in bed. Sometimes I'd hear her footsteps in the hallway late at night. She'd pause outside my door, like she wanted to come in. But she never did. Michael worked from home, running some kind of consulting business. At first, I tried to avoid him, spending as much time as possible in my room. But he seemed determined to break through my walls. He'd make me breakfast every morning, asking about my plans for the day. He noticed when I was struggling with math homework and offered to help. "I used to be pretty good at algebra," he'd say with an encouraging smile. Slowly, almost without realizing it, I started to let my guard down. Maybe it was because I was so lonely. Maybe it was because he was actually there, unlike Mom. Or maybe it was because he seemed to really see me when everyone else looked through me. The first time he helped me with homework, I got an A on the test. "See," he said, hanging it on the fridge. "I knew you could do it." It was the first time I'd felt proud of anything as I. NCE Dad died. After that, helping with homework became our routine. He'd sit next to me at the dining room table, patient and encouraging. When I got frustrated, he'd tell jokes to make me laugh. He started calling me Em, just like Dad used to. I should have noticed then how wrong that felt. But I was so desperate for something familiar, something that felt like home. The gift started small. A new notebook when mine was almost full. My favorite candy bars appearing in my backpack. Little things that seemed thoughtful, not suspicious. Then one day, I mentioned how my phone was acting up. The next morning, there was a brand new iPhone on my desk. "Don't tell your mom," Michael said with a wink. "She thinks these are too expensive for kids your age." I knew I should say no, that keeping secrets wasn't right. But the phone was so shiny and perfect. All the popular girls at school had ones just like it. So I nodded and promised not to tell. That was the first secret, but it wouldn't be the last. The jewelry came next. A delicate silver bracelet for my birthday. A pair of sapphire earrings just because. A heart-shaped locket that he helped me fasten around my neck. His fingers lingered on my skin a moment too long. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I pushed the feeling away. He was just being nice, I told myself. He was trying to make me feel better about everything I'd lost. But the touches started happening more often. A hand on my shoulder that stayed too long. Hugs that felt different from how a stepfather should hug. The way he'd brush my hair back from my face, his fingers trailing down my cheek. Each time, that shiver would return. Each time, I'd ignore it. At school, things weren't getting any better. I'd made a few acquaintances, but no real friends. The popular girls whispered about my expensive new things. "Where'd you get that phone? Those earrings look real. Must be nice having a rich stepdad." Their words made me feel dirty somehow, though I couldn't explain why. I started spending more time at home, avoiding their questions and looks. That's when things with Michael began to change. He'd sit closer during homework time, his leg pressed against mine. He'd find reasons to be wherever I was in the house. If I was reading in the living room, he'd work on his laptop there. If I was getting a snack in the kitchen, he'd suddenly need coffee. One night, Mom was working late again. Michael suggested we watch a movie. He sat next to me on the couch, closer than usual. Halfway through the film, he put his arm around me. "You're shivering," he said, though I wasn't cold at all. He pulled me against him, and I felt that familiar sick feeling in my stomach. But I didn't move away. I didn't know how to. The next day at school, I couldn't focus. My mind kept replaying that moment on the couch. The weight of his arm around me. The way he'd stroked my hair. The smell of his cologne, too strong and suffocating. I started having trouble sleeping. Nightmares plagued me, dark, confusing dreams where I was running but couldn't move. I'd wake up gasping, tangled in my sheets. Sometimes I'd hear Michael in the hallway outside my room. Just standing there. Listening. I started pushing my desk chair against my door at night. I told myself I was being paranoid. That I was imagining things. That Michael was just trying to be a good stepdad. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The way he looked at me when Mom wasn't around. The secret gifts that kept appearing. The touches that made my skin crawl. I thought about telling Mom, but what would I say? He hasn't done anything really wrong. He just makes me uncomfortable. He's too nice. Too interested. Too there. It all sounded ridiculous in my head. Plus, Mom was finally starting to smile again. She loved Michael, trusted him completely. Who was I to ruin that? So I kept quiet. I started making excuses to stay at school later. Joined the art club even though I couldn't draw. anything to avoid being home alone with him. But Michael always found ways to be alone with me anyway. He'd offer to pick me up from school when Mom was working. "It's not safe for you to walk home alone," he'd say. The drives home became torture. His hand would find its way to my knee. "You're such a special girl, Emma. We have such a special connection. You understand me in a way no one else does." I'd stare out the window, counting the blocks until we got home, praying Mom's car would be in the driveway. It never was. Then came the day he bought the camera. "I want to document our family memories," he said at dinner. Mom thought it was a wonderful idea. I felt sick to my stomach, because I saw the look in his eyes when he said it. I saw the way he was looking at me, not her. And I knew, somehow, that things were about to get much worse. The camera became his constant companion. He'd take pictures at dinner, at breakfast, during movie nights. Normal family stuff, Mom said. But then he started taking pictures when Mom wasn't around. "You're so photogenic, Em. The camera loves you. Let's keep these just between us." I started avoiding the camera, turning away when he pointed it at me. But he always found ways to catch me anyway. Through my bedroom window while I was doing homework. In the hallway when I came out of the shower. Even at school events, he'd be there. Watching. Clicking. Capturing. I felt like I was being hunted in my own home. The safe space that was supposed to be mine wasn't safe anymore. Nothing was safe anymore. And the worst part? I still couldn't tell anyone. Because who would believe me? The camera was just for family photos. The gifts were just kindness. The touches were just affection. But I knew better. I knew what was coming. I just didn't know how to stop it. The night everything changed. Ed started like any other. Mom was working a double shift at the hospital. I was in my room, trying to focus on my history homework. Michael knocked on my door, camera in hand. "Emma? Can we talk?" My stomach twisted into knots, but I nodded. He sat on the edge of my bed, too close. "I've been thinking about us," he said softly. "About how special our relationship is." I stared at my textbook, the words blurring together. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." His voice was different now, harder, colder. When I didn't move, he grabbed my chin, forcing me to face him. "You know how much I care about you, right?" The camera sat in his lap, its lens like a black eye staring at me. "I want to show you something." He pulled out his phone, started scrolling through photos. Photos of me. Photos I didn't know he'd taken. Me sleeping. Me changing. Me in the bathroom. "No one else would understand our love," he whispered. "But if they saw these..." The threat hung in the air between us. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "You wouldn't want your mom to see these, would you? Or your friends at school?" I shook my head, tears burning in my eyes. "Good girl," he said, stroking my hair. "Now, let's make some new memories." The camera clicked on, red light blinking. What happened next plays in my mind like a broken film reel. Fragments of horror I can't piece together. His hands. The camera's eye. My own silence. Afterward, I ran to the bathroom and threw up. I stood under the shower until the water ran cold. But I couldn't wash away the feeling of being dirty. Of being broken. Of being trapped. That was 3 months ago. Since then, every day has been a nightmare I can't wake up from. Michael got bolder, more demanding. The camera became his weapon. Just one more video, he'd say. You're so beautiful on camera. This is what love looks like. I stopped eating. Stopped sleeping. Stopped caring about school or friends or anything. My grades plummeted. Teachers started sending notes home. But Michael intercepted them all. I'll handle this, he told Mom. Emma's just going through a phase. Mom was too busy to notice the changes in me. Or maybe she didn't want to notice. She'd come home exhausted, kiss my forehead, and go to bed. While her husband, the monster she married, destroyed her daughter. I thought about running away. But where would I go? And what would Michael do with those videos? I thought about ending it all. But then he would win. And maybe someone else's daughter would be next. I started writing everything down in a journal. Hidden under my mattress. Every touch, every photo, every threat. Maybe someday someone would find it. Maybe someday someone would believe me. Then last week, something inside me snapped. I was sitting in English class, staring out the window. We were studying the Scarlet Letter. The teacher was talking about silence. About secrets. About the weight of carrying shame that isn't yours to carry. And suddenly, I couldn't breathe. I ran out of class. Straight to the guidance counselor's office. Mrs. Rodriguez took one look at me and closed her door. Tell me, she said. So I did. I told her everything. About the gifts. The photos. The videos. The threats. She listened without interrupting. Without judging. When I finished, she handed me a tissue and picked up her phone. We need to call the police, she said. No. I screamed. He'll release the videos. Emma, she said gently, what he's doing is a crime. Those videos are evidence. He's the one who should be ashamed, not you. But I couldn't do it. Not yet. I made her promise not to call anyone. Said I needed time to think. She made me promise to come back tomorrow. To not do anything drastic. I went home that day with a plan forming in my mind. I needed proof that couldn't be denied. I needed my mom to see the truth. I needed to end this nightmare. So I started gathering evidence. Screenshots of his texts. Receipts from the gifts. Photos of the camera equipment hidden in his office. I wrote my mom a long email, explaining everything. Attached all the proof I could find. My finger hovered over the send button for what felt like hours. Then I clicked it. Now I'm sitting here, waiting. Wondering if she'll believe me. Wondering what happens next. Wondering if I'll ever feel clean again. If you're reading this, maybe you're like me. Maybe you're carrying a secret that's eating you alive. Maybe you think no one will believe you. But I'm telling my story because silence protects the wrong people. Silence gives power to monsters. And I'm done being silent. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know if my mom will choose me or him. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. But I know I'm not alone. And neither are you. We survive. We speak up. We fight back. And someday, maybe we heal. This is my story. But it doesn't end here. Because I'm finally finding my voice. And I'm going to use it. For every girl who's ever felt trapped. For every child who's ever been told this is our secret. For every survivor who's still learning to survive. This is for you. You are not alone. You are not to blame. And it's time to break the silence. End.